Hello and welcome to Hexed Encountered. My name is Joe. Today I am going to be doing a second gameplay video. This will be covering the second of the two major play examples from the playbook for the game A Glorious Chance, the naval struggle for Lake Ontario in the War of 1812. This game's designed by Gina Willis and is published by Legion Wargames. And I did a previous video showing basically a lot of the, management overview with a little bit of some combat from the US side. This game does allow you to play, it is a solitaire game, but it does let you play as both the US side and the British side. So that first video, which if you haven't watched, I would recommend checking out, does cover the US side. This video will cover the British side. So we will be using the British solo map and the British player aids and so on and so forth. And the AI system will control the Americans. And this one will be heavily focused on combat. So this is a good supplement to the first playthrough. And, I believe that Gina Willis probably designed it this way and laid it out this way, because if you step through all of the play example material in the playbook, you will get a really solid and complete picture of how the game works. So enough of the preamble. Let's get right down to setup and then play. So here we have a look at our British home port display as we get ready to pick up play here. And as you can see, they have taken a little bit of some lumps here. But what we've got is we have Royal George is the only one that's actually active right now and deployable. We have the flagship, the Wolf, as well as Earl of Moira in the repairing box. You can see it says repairing. And we have Lord Beresford in the make ready box. It's being upgraded to its B version. And then, of course, under construction, we have Lord Melville. The Lord Beresford spent the last turn in the make ready box. It's getting its armament upgraded. So if you watched the first video, you might remember that you roll when you have combat with the British from the American side to determine whether or not their ships have been upgraded. When you play as the British, obviously you would then, as the player, be able to determine when the British ships get upgraded. And so in this case, we are taking the Lord Beresford here and taking its A version. So this is the A version of it. And we are going to swap that out for its upgraded B version. So the B version goes in there. And we get to move it to the deployable area. So it is now deployable. Now the two remaining British ships that are eligible for upgrade, the Wolf and the Earl of Moira, they are in the, as I said, they're in the repairing. And the rule is when a ship is repaired, it can also be upgraded concurrently. So both of these are going to be removed and upgraded as well. We're going to put Earl of Moira and the Wolf in their upgraded forms. You can see they've now added some long gun power. And they are down one ship. So what happened to that one ship? Well, it was captured by the Americans in the June 1 turn. Since we're picking this up in the middle of the game, so to speak, in turn 3, essentially, that ship has already been captured, and that's part of our setup here. Okay, so we'll switch over now and look at the American home port display. So you can see their main ships are here. The Madison is the flagship. We have our secondary ships over here. We have our two under construction ships, the Pike and the Sylph, here in the construction box. And we have, in repairing, a reduced Sir Sidney Smith. This is a British ship that was captured in the June 1 turn. So that one is going to get flipped, and it's going to get a reflagged counter here to denote that it is now an American ship. So I'm just going to drop that on top of the Oneida here. And so now the Americans have actually picked up a reasonably useful ship. Okay, so here we have a look at the British map. I've laid out 9 target cards, and the reason I did that is here our naval balance shows as 0. Basically, But because of the loss of the Sir Sidney Smith, it actually goes to plus 16 for the Americans because they have a 100 to 84 balance of power, essentially. So you add up the values of the ships and on each side. And because the British lost a ship, that value is now a plus 16 in favor of the Americans. So they will draw 9 target cards here. So I have 9 target cards. And again, if you watched the first video, you know that these cards designate areas of the lake where possible encounters might take place. Now, we're not at that point yet. I already laid these out, but that's just to have everything set up so I can just kind of flow through the playthrough here. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is British assignments. Considering the dismal chances of building a new ship anytime soon, because our convoy supply has regressed to 1. Actually, this is supposed to be up here, I believe. Because of the regression to space 1, and the fact that the Lord Melville, which is in the construction, it suffered damage last turn due to a U.S. land battle against Kingston Harbor. So we're going to assign our squadron a raid mission in the Sackett's zone. So this is Sackett's here. We're going to assign the squadron to a raid mission in Sackett's Lake Zone, since it'll have a chance to steal needed supplies, put victory points on the board, capture an enemy ship if battle occurs, and perhaps even find a vulnerable U.S. supply convoy, because the U.S. convoy path, as was mentioned again in the previous video, runs between Oswego and Sackett's Harbor. So the Wolf A is our flagship, as it was in the past, and it's going to deploy along with the 3 other ships that we have available. That would be the Royal George, Lord Beresford, and Earl of Moira. Now we will check to see whether the AI Americans have any troops available. So we flip over 2 markers here because they didn't use 1 last turn. And the first one is good and the second one is not. So they do have 1. So they have an available troop for this turn. Now we would, at this point, draw our target cards. As I mentioned, I already did that kind of ahead of time to set all this up and save time. So they're in a row left to right, and you start at the left end and work your way right. Okay, the only place where we have British ships is in the Sackett zone. So only targets that are Sackett zone, like this one, and this one. So 1, 3, and 5 are Sacketts. So this would be a place where we would potentially have both British and American ships, and therefore have the possibility for an encounter. The first thing we're going to do here, we're going to place our 3 possible encounter markers here. 1, 2, and 3. And this will help. That's just to mark, to show that we may have an encounter there. Now, once we've done that, we have to check them in numerical order. So the way these become encounters, it depends on your event deck. So we draw the top card off the event deck, and you can see this symbol in the top, which shows a spyglass with an officer behind it. That indicates that is an encounter. So what we're going to do is we'll put that event card out, and we now can reveal our target card over here. Okay, so here's our target card, so you can get a better look at it. And it shows, you check the column for troops, which is why we needed to know how many troops they have available. So you check troops and the balance of power here. And we have a 4. So that requires us now to check the Player Aid 4, which is the American AI Force Package. Okay, we have it. All right, so here it is. It's actually Player Aid 5, so it's kind of a misprint in the playbook. Package number 4, 16 points of long gun strength, deploy as a single force. So I'm actually going to pull these down for now. We will need, you can't discard these because if you have leftover ships from the enemy, they would have the opportunity to do their own operations, perhaps in a sea or a lake zone rather that you don't have any ships in. All right, so we do know that this is actually an encounter, so I didn't actually replace that, which I should have. So we do know that this is an encounter. Okay, so Player Aid 5, as I just showed, has American AI Force packages. And we need to check if the U.S. has 16 points of long gun strength deployed as a single force. Can that be created from the pool of U.S. deployable ships? It can, but if you deploy the Americans 6 main ships first, 3 more long gun points are needed. So you will need to draw secondary ships at random until the required strength is reached. Okay, so here we have our late combat sequence of play. You have a British path and an American path. So depending on which one has the weather gauge and therefore the advantage, you would follow the path. But in this case, what I really wanted to talk about were these tactic cards, because that's the next step. So in combat sequence B, we would then go and here's combat sequence B. Draw and select tactics is what it says right here. So any tactic would be valid because there are no symbols on the event card we drew most recently. So here's our event card, and you can see there would be symbols in here that might cause various tactics to not be usable. But because we have a fair wind, I'm guessing we don't have any symbols down here. So we draw cards. Now the British, as the human player, will get 4, and since they're attacking, they'll draw from the attacker tactic. The defending Americans will get 5 as a kind of a, an advantage based on the fact that it's an AI. So we're going to draw 4 cards here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to look at them. You discard the dummy card. And then you would choose which one of these you wish to use. So we will choose grapple, because the grapple is a British specific one that says British are certain their experienced Royal Marines and better trained crews will prevail in a boarding action. This tactic benefits only the British and only when they are attacking. After gunnery round 2, skip the sequence's second weather gauge check and go to close action with these exceptions, and then you would roll here. So this is the card that the British will use, and we'll hold on to that. I will put the other 2 aside, and then we have the 5 for the Americans. So we'll draw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you have a couple dummies, so the dummies will also be discarded. And then you would randomly choose which one of these to come out as the American tactic. They choose mutual support. A tight formation keeps the attacker from exploiting any gaps in the defender's line of battle. This only applies for the duration of the current combat sequence. It negates attacker rake and attacker outmaneuver tactics. So that's theirs, and that is the end of that. So I'm going to jump back from this, and we're going to go to the battle board, and that'll be all set up, and then we'll go through the lake combat. Okay, so here we have a somewhat truncated view of the battle board. There are actually 16 columns here. We only go up to 10, only because I figured it would be better to zoom in a little closer and show you what's on the board rather than, showing a bunch of empty space. So we do have 8 American ships and 4 British ships. The flagships are denoted by the flagship marker. And so the first thing we're going to do is roll on the lake combat table, which is actually located on the main map board. So we know our odds are 1 to 1. So we roll 1d10 and we roll a 6. We roll a 6, and the 6 gets modified +1 to a 7 for the presence of the Commodore, as long as he's not become a casualty, which he has not. So that becomes a 7, and a 7 on the 1 to 1 column is an A1/D2. For each hit, 2d6 is rolled, and red is 11 to 66 on the Lake Combat Gunnery Hit Distribution Table, which is player aid number 6. We roll an 11, and we look on our chart here, and you can see there's 4 ships, so we're rolling for the 1 hit on the British. 4 ships, 11 is, of course, at the top. That's 1 hit. 1 hit with the 11, right? So basically anything from 11 to 22, or 23 rather, is 1 hit. So that hit is going to be inflicted on the Wolf. So the Wolf is a 3-step ship denoted by the dots here. So it's going to get reduced. So you flip it over to its 2-step side. You roll 2d6 for your commander casualty check or leader casualty check, and we roll an 8. So that indicates that Commodore Yeo survives. And then you have to roll for a disengagement check. You roll 1d6, and the roll of 4 means the wolf does not disengage. So the wolf gets to stay in the battle. Yeo is not removed. He is not a casualty, but the ship is reduced. So now we would need to roll on the, well, let me remove this. Now we need to roll for the American hits. So the first hit on the American line of battle crashes into the #1 position ship, the flagship USS Madison. It is a roll of 12 on the 8 ships column. So again, we come to the 8 ships and it's a 12, so it's 1 hit again. Chauncey 2, that would be Commodore Chauncey, the American commander, survives his leader casualty check on a 1d6 roll of 7. And the Madison is now reduced as well to 2 steps. So we flip the Madison over to its 2-step side. And it also does not disengage with a 1d6 roll of 4. All right, so the second hit, we roll a 46. And again on the 8 ships column. So this would impact the USS Scourge. So the USS Scourge is over here. It is a 1-step ship. It is a single step ship rather. And we flip it over to its no-step side. And that forces a strike check. So the 1d6 die roll there is a 2, and that gives a fight on result, which means the Scourge not only refuses to surrender, but it will remain in its #6 spot in the lineup here. So basically, you're rolling to see if it's going to strike its colors and basically surrender, give up the fight. In this case, the Scourge says, no way, we're going to fight on, and the battle continues. So, since at least one side still has full-strength ships on the late combat board, there are still plenty of them, in fact, the sides are still engaged, and we move, and combat sequence B, rather, continues. So you call combat sequence A for the Americans, combat sequence B for the British, depending on who has the weather gauge and therefore the advantage. Both lines of battle draw closer, now moving to their gunnery round 2 zones, so everybody kind of slides up. So the British still hold the weather gauge and can attack, but since only full-strength ships are allowed to attack, the Wolf A, or Wolf rather, it's a B actually, stays here. That's why it didn't move up, because it has to be full strength to continue the attack, and it is not full strength any longer. So seeing that this would also prevent Commodore Yeo from conveying his command die roll modifier, the player decides to transfer the flag, and this is in section 5.1 of the rules. So he's going to transfer the flag of the British squadron from the Wolf to the Royal George. Yeo must now pass an extra leader casualty check in order to transfer his flag. The 2d6 roll of 5 is no effect, so the flagship marker transfers to the Royal George. The Royal George now leads the British line of battle as the opposing sides move to their gunnery round 2 zones. So a decision again for the British. An attack would now be at 1 to 1.5 odds because of the Wolf being out of the battle. But with Yeo's +1 modifier, it would still be reasonable to press on, and they do have the grapple card that they chose for their tactics. So the British have no risk of losing the weather gauge, which would give the advantage to the Americans, of course, after this second gunnery round, and then can fight them on stronger terms in the close action round, because the British are better at close action. That bit about the Royal Marines was true, and the British were very good at close combat. So a cheer erupts from the British line as the attack signal goes up. Okay, so the die is rolled again. They roll an 8. The 8 gets modified to a 9 because of Commodore Yeo, which results in a D2W. So the defender takes 2 hits, and the W has to make a strike check for withdrawal. All right, the gunnery hit distribution table. We're going to do our rolls now. We roll 51 and 53 on the 8-ship column, and both hits land on the already reduced Scourge. The Scourge was already on its 0-step side, so the 2 hits that fall on a 0-step ship add a +2 die roll modifier to its strike check, and we roll a 1d6, and a modified die roll of 9 sinks her. So the Scourge has been sunk. Okay, so we're going to remove that. Now, so the Scourge was very unlucky in this combat and ended up taking 3 hits, and because it's such a smaller ship, it actually gets sunk. And the W part of the result, as I said, signals withdrawal for the remaining 7 American ships. They skedaddle to the in-transit area of Sackett's Harbor display and end encounter 1 just before the British can unleash a close action round and play their grapple tactic. Now, if the British had chosen the pursuit tactic instead of grapple, the W result would have been canceled and a new encounter cycle begun. The British squadron is placed back in the Sackett's Lake zone, and the encounter 1 marker flips to encounter ended, which I already did. The sinking USS Scourge is placed back in the Sackett's Lake Zone 2 with its destroyed sunk marker as a reminder to tally British victory points for it later. We're going to continue with the second action here, and this one we're going to abstract out and not show it. This was also a patrol for the U.S. In the playbook, it says, as the lake action cycle continues, encounter 2 results in a British attack against a weak 2-ship American patrol. The British sink the USS Julia and reduce the USS Lady of the Lake before she disengages to end the encounter. So I'm going to just leave that there like that. And what we'll do is we'll take the Lady of the Lake and we'll put her in transit on the American home port display as a reduced ship. And then we will also put the Julia in here with a destroyed sunk marker as well to indicate that the British have sunk a second American ship. And so now we will go on to target number 3 for Sackett's. So this one we'll mark as ended as well. We turn encounter 2 to encounter ended, and we have encounter 3. I've already actually put it into its active encounter because the next card is going to result in this being an actual encounter. Okay, so the first thing we do is we look at our target card, we flip it over, and it says, okay, the mission is escort. All right, so now again, we have to check. They have 1 troop, and we go to the 16 or greater, and it's a dash, which means that they don't actually send any ships out. They do have a ship, the Sir Sidney Smith, that they captured, but because the card says they don't actually deploy anybody, this is an unescorted convoy. So that's going to bring up an interesting situation for the Americans. And I did forget to check the July convoy. And it is a check mark, so they do have a convoy. I missed that step, and I apologize. So you would check for the convoy. It is a convoy. We check for an escort. There is no escort. Well, we check the escort first, then we check the convoy. There is no convoy. So now this creates an interesting situation for the Americans because they have an unescorted convoy that's about to be preyed upon by several British ships here. This allows the player to make an immediate 1d10 die roll on the convoy scatter table. So here's our convoy scatter table. So we're going to roll 1d10 on there, and we roll a 3. Okay, so a 3, total number of guns, all types in the enemy zone. So the total number of guns for the British is between 43 and 63. So we come across to the 3 column, and we see that it is an S, which means they scatter. So what scattering means, the convoy splits up and each vessel flees in a different direction, and they seek to go up, creeks and rivers and so on to get beyond the reach of the British warships by going into waters that are too shallow for them. So that would actually end this encounter. And we flip that to encounter ended as well. And now all possible encounters have been resolved. The lake action phase ends, but the presence of 1 deployable U.S. ship means there will be an enemy operations phase. To perform the enemy operations phase, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the 3 target cards that we already resolved. That will leave us with 6, right? So we have these 6 here, and then you go through them, you flip them all, right? And you go through them one by one to determine, and you start again on the left. So let's just take this card, for example. So we have North Lake, so that's here. Mission Patrol with a secondary of attack British convoy. This is within the convoy route, of course. But you look at the 1 row, 1 troop available row, and the plus 16 column, and there's a dash. So that's no deployment. And then if we took this guy here, this one says this is York, which is over here. Patrol with, again, attack British convoy. 1, and then you have packet 11. Now, if I look at packet 11, so here's our troop packets, right? Or ship packets, rather. 11, or packages, sorry. 5 steps worth of secondary ships selected at random. The Americans currently only have 2 available, so they're unable to do that as well. And so according to the playbook, all of these cards would result in nothing, and that actually ends the turn. So I'm just going to pick all these up. And after that, we would go to the coastal action phase, because our mission for our ships here was a raid on Sackett's Harbor. So an event card is drawn for a possible coastal event. So we draw the card, and it's more defenders. This event affects only the drawing side's forces with an army support mission in this lake zone. The defending side has reinforced the coastal target. So we're not actually doing an army support mission in this turn. We're doing a raid, and it does not, so that doesn't apply. So the player moves the raid marker to the coastal target, indicating the end of the turn. So that ends that phase, and we move on to the tally and reset phase. So for destroyed and captured ships, the British sank the Scourge and the Julia. Each of those is worth, here on our list, there are other schooners, they're worth 2 victory points if destroyed, 4 if captured. They were both destroyed. That's a -4. The British victory points work negative, and the Americans work positive, and then you have a game score, which is just the difference, the delta between the two. So lake zone control. In the Sackett's lake zone, the British have 5 or more steps from full-strength ships, and the Americans had none. So they're actually going to end up controlling this because they have more than 5 steps while the Americans have none. Okay, so we'll put a lake control here for the British in Sackett, and as I mentioned, the Americans have the north, or south lake rather, and the Kingston zone. So this would be 2 for them and -1. You get, those points happen every turn. So for every turn that you control a lake zone, if you're the American side, you get a +1. If you're the British side, you get a -1. So that's how that works. So there were no land battles, so that would have no effect. The British raid on Sackett's coastline gets them a -2. So adjustments to the convoy supply track. The U.S. side ran a convoy, but it's scattered. So as a result, a convoy delay marker is placed on the convoy. Because the convoy was delayed, what we do is we take a convoy delay marker and we put it on the convoy and the turn track to know that the convoy there was delayed. And they do not get to advance the supply track this turn, so they're not going to move this way. The British, however, did successfully run a convoy. Their track marker advances 2 spaces from 1 to 3, like so. In addition, the British now get to roll 1d6 to see if they manage to steal any American supplies in the Sackett's zone from their raid. The roll is a 1, and you require a 5 or 6, which it says right here. Die roll 5 or 6. So no U.S. supplies were stolen. We check the blockades. The British do control the Sackett's Lake Zone, but they have only 3 full-strength ships there. And in addition, there's still an American ship in the zone. That would be the reduced Lady of the Lake, so no British blockade markers placed. The board is then reset for the next turn with the score British -24, US 15. So you would say the British would go here and here to show that they are, the 10s are on the 2 marker, so 24. And the Americans get 2, so they're on the 10 plus 5 is 15. You would take the 24 and the 15 and subtract the difference, and the game score would be -9, so you just put this here. And that indicates that the British are pretty close to getting a marginal victory. So that is the end of the British playthrough. So I appreciate you guys watching as always. I hope this was useful and that I didn't make too many mistakes. Gina Willis was kind enough to comment on the first video and point out some stuff that I did actually get wrong. So that is good, and I appreciate her doing that. And if she wants to and watches this one as well and decides that, hey, Joe, you screwed something up, I would be appreciative of any corrections there as well, because the goal here is to show you guys how this game works. So nobody would know that better than the designer herself. All right, so that's going to do it. My name's Joe. This is Hexed Encountered. Please consider liking, sharing, and or subscribing if you would to help support my channel. That would be awesome and greatly appreciated. But until next time, that will do it. And as always, I want to wish everybody happy gaming.